She told my son I was an eyesore that needed to be liquidated, right before she tried to cut my throat with a silver steak knife in the house I built with my own hands. She thought the old man in the black robes was too fragile to see the shark circling his own living room, but she was about to learn that you don't bring a lie into a courtroom where I am the one holding the gavel. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're listening from. It's good to have witnesses when a professional predator realizes she's the one being judged. This story is inspired by Inspiration 3, but instead of building with wood, I spent 35 years building the truth, and I was about to demolish her entire life. Before the handcuffs clicked and the white silk turned to rags, it all began with the relentless sound of the tide. The Atlantic Ocean does not bargain. It is a creditor that never stops collecting. It takes the fine white sand from the dunes with every receding tide. It carves jagged, weeping wounds into the granite cliffs, and eventually it begins to claim the silence of the men who are foolish enough to watch it for too long. I have lived on the precipice of these gray, churning waters for 40 years. My home is a fortress, a deliberate construction of cedar, salt-cured glass, and reinforced concrete. I built it when my hands were calloused and strong, and my heart was overflowing with a foolish, beautiful optimism that I could create a sanctuary the world couldn't touch. I saw the house as a testament to stability. Now the salt has etched its way into the wood, and the glass is pitted by decades of winter storms. Only the house remains, standing stubbornly against the gale. And me, we are both weathering, but neither of us has buckled yet. My name is Thomas Vance. For 35 years I sat on the federal bench, a silhouette in black robes against the mahogany backdrop of a courtroom. In that room I held the weight of human lives, their freedoms, their fortunes, their very futures in the palm of my hand. The law is a cold science, but judgment? Judgment is an art. I learned to distinguish between the shivering mistake of a desperate man and the calculated, bone-deep malice of a wicked one. I learned that truth doesn't scream, it whispers in the gaps between lies. When I retired, I thought I had left that world of condemnation behind. I thought I had hung up the robe to tend to Eleanor's hydrangeas, to fight the encroaching weeds, and to watch the tides measure out the remainder of my days. But judgment is a muscle. It does not atrophy. It merely waits for the next trial. It waits for the moment the structural integrity of a life is tested. The conflict began on a Tuesday in late October, a day when the sky was the color of a bruised plum, heavy with the threat of a nor'easter. The wind was kicking up the whitecaps, turning the ocean into a field of jagged teeth. I heard the car before I saw it. My son Lucas pulled into the gravel driveway, his tires spitting stones. The car door slammed with a sharp, metallic crack that echoed like a gunshot in the morning silence. It was an aggressive sound, a herald of the disruption to come. He wasn't alone. He had brought his fiancée Vanessa for what they called the final wedding walkthrough. Lucas was 32 now, a talented architect with his mother's soft, empathetic eyes, and a heart that had always been terrified of the dark and of being alone. He had met Vanessa 8 months ago, a whirlwind romance that felt less like a courtship and more like a hostile takeover. She called herself a brand consultant, a vague title for a woman whose primary product seemed to be herself. To me, through the distortion of the salt-stained window, she looked like a shark in a silk blouse, sleek, predatory, and entirely out of place in the rugged honesty of the coast. I stood in the kitchen, slowly drying a coffee mug, my eyes fixed on them through the sliding glass doors. I didn't go out to greet them. I watched. Vanessa wasn't looking at the view. She was surveying the perimeter. She walked the edge of the deck with a proprietary stride, her heels clicking on the wood like a ticking clock. She stopped at the old oak tree, the gnarled, salt-hardened giant that Eleanor had loved more than the house itself. It shaded the west side of the property, its roots entwined with the very foundation of the cliff. She pointed at it. She made a sharp, horizontal chopping motion with her hand, quick, clinical, and final. Lucas stood beside her, nodding, tapping notes into his phone. He looked exhausted. His shoulders, usually broad and confident, were slumped as if under an invisible load. He looked like a man who was losing a war of attrition, one compromise at a time. They came inside bringing a sudden, violent gust of cold, salty air that scattered the mail on the entryway table. "Dad," Lucas said, stepping into the kitchen. He forced a smile, but it was a brittle thing. It didn't reach the hollows beneath his eyes. He reached out to shake my hand, his grip lacking the firm resonance it used to have. Vanessa stepped forward before I could respond. She was beautiful in a sharp, angular way. High cheekbones that could cut glass, immaculate blonde hair that the wind hadn't dared to muss, and eyes that assessed the value of everything they touched. She didn't look at me as a person. She looked at me as a line item on a balance sheet. "Thomas," she said, her voice a smooth, rehearsed purr that set my teeth on edge. "We appreciate you letting us drop in. We really want this day to be transformative." "What kind of transformation are we talking about?" I asked, setting the mug down on the counter with a deliberate heavy thud. "Perfection," she said, her eyes scanning the kitchen, lingering on the slightly worn copper pots. "The current layout is a bit congested. If we remove that old oak tree on the deck, we can expand the dance floor right to the edge of the cliff. We could put in glass railings. It would be panoramic, a seamless transition from the event to the abyss." The mug hit the counter with a loud clink. The sound seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "The tree stays, Lucas," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I used the tone I had used to sentence men to life terms, low, firm, and absolute. "Your mother planted that tree the day we broke ground. Its roots are as deep as this house." Vanessa didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Instead, she reached out and touched Lucas's arm, a light, delicate gesture, but I saw the way her fingers tightened. It was a gesture of ownership, a reminder of who he belonged to now. "Thomas," she said, a layer of condescension dripping from every syllable. "We understand the sentimentality. Truly, but an old gnarled tree just ruins the line of sight. It creates shadows where we need light. We want perfection for your son's big day, don't we?" "Perfection is not the absence of history, Vanessa," I replied, staring directly into those cold, calculating eyes. "It is the respect for it. That tree has survived hurricanes. It has more character than anything you're planning to build on top of it." She smiled then, but it was a terrifying expression, a baring of teeth that had nothing to do with joy. "Well, it's a shame," she said, turning her back on me to look out the window. "It would have added so much value to the property view. You know, for the future, for when things inevitably change." There it was. The first drop of poison in the well. Value, future, change. She wasn't talking about a wedding. She was talking about an exit strategy. She was talking about the liquidation of a life she hadn't helped build. "The future of this house is not in question," I said, my voice hardening. "Of course not," she replied quickly, her tone shifting back to that faux sweetness. "But life is fluid, Thomas. People move on. Assets should be accessible. We're just thinking about what's best for Lucas." She walked away toward the living room, her eyes already cataloging the antiques, the silver, the history. Lucas looked at me, his expression pained, caught between the ghost of his mother and the demands of his future. He didn't say a word. He couldn't. He just turned and followed her into the shadows of the hallway. Later that afternoon, the first real battle began. The house felt smaller, the air heavier with the scent of her expensive, cloying perfume. I was in my study, the one room she hadn't yet ventured into. I was reviewing the vendor contracts. Lucas had left on my desk for my records. My eyes, trained to find the hidden clauses and the inflated figures, immediately began to lock on to the discrepancies. "Lucas," I called out. He appeared in the doorway moments later. Vanessa hovered behind him like a phantom, her presence a silent pressure on his spine. "This catering bill," I said, tapping the heavy cream paper with my pen. "It's 4 times the budget we agreed on last month. The floral line item alone could purchase a mid-sized sedan." "It's a celebration, Thomas," Vanessa interjected, stepping into the room uninvited. She began to run a finger along the spines of my law books, her touch dismissive. "Imported beluga caviar? Vintage Dom Perignon? A custom-built stage for a 10-piece orchestra?" I read the list aloud, each item sounding more absurd than the last. "This is not a celebration of a union, Vanessa. This is a coronation, or a trade show. Lucas deserves the best," she said, crossing her arms and leaning against the doorframe. "Unless, of course, you don't think he's worth the investment. Unless you're more concerned with your bank balance than his happiness." I stood up slowly. I am a tall man, and in the small confines of the study I still knew how to command space. I think he is worth a marriage built on reality, Vanessa, not a mountain of debt designed to provide a backdrop for your social media profile. I am paying for this wedding, I continued, my voice echoing off the leather-bound books, and I will not pay for excess designed to impress people you don't even like. I will not fund a performance. Vanessa laughed. It was a brittle, dry sound, like dead leaves being crushed under a boot. Impress strangers? She asked, her eyes flashing with a sudden mace intelligence. Thomas, these are my clients. My network. This wedding is the most important networking event of our year. It's a branding launch for our future together. She looked at my dusty desk, my old fountain pen, and my manual typewriter with a look of pure disdain. If we look cheap, we lose business. If we look like we're struggling, we are struggling. But I guess a government pensioner wouldn't understand the nuances of modern economics. You're used to a world that doesn't exist anymore. She walked out, the click-clack of her heels sounding like a retreat or a victory lap. The insult hung in the air, thick and foul. Lucas stayed behind for a moment, his face pale in the dim light of the study. He wouldn't look at the desk. He wouldn't look at me. She's just stressed, Dad, he whispered, his voice cracking. She's under a lot of pressure. She just wants everything to be perfect. Is that so much to ask? Be very careful, son, I warned, reaching out to touch his shoulder, but he flinched away. In my experience, perfection is almost always a mask. People use it to hide the fact that they are terrified of losing control, or that they have something to hide. He didn't answer. He turned and left the room, his footsteps heavy and hollow. The weeks leading up to the wedding were not marked by joy, but by a slow, methodical siege. Vanessa moved into the guest cottage, a small, sun-drenched sanctuary nestled 50 yards from the main house to oversee preparations. In reality, she was establishing a forward operating base for the dismantling of my life. From that cottage, she began to weave a web around my son. It started with small, surgical strikes against his social circle. I would overhear her on the porch, her voice a soft, sympathetic weapon. Are you sure Mark actually supports your career, Lucas? He seems so dismissive of your new firm at dinner. Or no, they're your oldest friends, but do they really fit into the life we're building? One by one, the lights of Lucas's life were extinguished. The phone calls from his college roommates stopped. The weekend hiking trips were replaced by strategy brunches with Vanessa's mysterious associates. She was creating a vacuum, a sensory deprivation chamber, where she was the only voice he heard, the only North Star he was allowed to follow. I watched it happen, paralyzed by a terror I had never felt on the bench, the fear that if I reached out to pull him back, the tether would snap and I would lose him to the dark water forever. One evening, the fog rolled in so thick it swallowed the lighthouse beams. I found Vanessa in the hallway, standing before the gallery wall of our lives. She was holding a silver picture frame, the one Eleanor and I had bought in a dusty shop behind the Place de Varzy, on our 20th anniversary. It held a photo of us, wind-blown and radiant, laughing in the rain. This frame, she said, not turning around. She tilted it so the dim light caught the metal. Is it solid silver, or just a plated imitation? It is solid sterling, I said, my voice tight. I stepped forward and took it from her hands, the cold metal feeling like an anchor in my palm. You should melt it down, she said casually, as if suggesting I change a light bulb. Or sell it. It's tarnished. It looks dirty, Thomas. It doesn't match the brushed nickel we've selected for the reception tables. It's an eyesore. It has patina. I snapped, my thumb tracing the worn edge where Eleanor used to polish it every Sunday. It stays. It's not just metal. It's a record of time. You hold on to so much junk, she sighed. A sound of feigned pity. She finally turned to look at me, her eyes as vacant and beautiful as a doll's. What those? It's unhealthy, really. What's a symptom of? Well, Lucas and I have talked about it. He's quite concerned, you know. My heart skipped a beat, a cold flutter in my chest. Concerned about what? Your mental state, she whispered, leaning in, as if sharing a painful secret. He says you're turning into a hoarder of ghosts, that you're living in a mausoleum and trying to drag him into the grave with you. He's worried you're losing your grip on what's real. I stared at her, searching for a flicker of hesitation, a sign of a bluff. But there was nothing. I knew Lucas. I knew the cadence of his thoughts, and I knew he had never said those words. But in the silence of that hallway, with the fog pressing against the windows, a seed of doubt tried to take root. That is the brilliance of a master manipulator. They don't just lie to you about the world. They lie to you about the people you love. Lucas can tell me that himself, I said, but my voice sounded hollow to my own ears. He won't, she smiled, and for a second the mask slipped. The cruelty was naked, sharp, and hungry, because he's too weak. He's too burdened by guilt to tell his aging father that he's become a burden. That's why he needs me, Thomas. I'm the strength he doesn't have. I'm the one who clears the clutter. She walked away, humming a tune that sounded like a dirge. The tension finally broke open like a rotted dam the week before the wedding. I returned from a meeting with the Historical Society to find a massive white moving truck idling in the driveway, its exhaust mingling with the salt spray. I stormed into the house, my boots thundering on the hardwood. Vanessa was in the center of the living room, a clipboard in one hand and a latte in the other, directing two burly men who were currently hoisting my leather armchair, the chair where I had read every brief, every novel, and every bedtime story to Lucas. What the hell is this? I demanded. Oh, good, you're back, Vanessa said, not even looking up from her list. We're just doing a preliminary sweep. We need to clear this room entirely for the cocktail hour. The furniture is far too heavy. It's masculine, aggressive. It ruins the coastal ethereal vibe we've worked so hard on. Put it down, I commanded. It was the voice, the one that had silenced high-priced defense attorneys and rowdy galleries for 30 years. It didn't come from my throat. It came from my marrow. The two movers froze. The chair hovered in the air, a suspended relic of my comfort. They looked at each other, then at me, sensing a power dynamic they weren't paid to navigate. Thomas, don't be difficult, Vanessa hissed, her composure finally beginning to fray at the edges. It's just for the weekend. We're putting it in a storage pod. It's for the sake of the flow. This is my home, not a hotel lobby. I shouted, the volume of my own voice surprising me. This chair stays where it is. These rugs stay where they are. Get out. Everyone out. Now, she signaled the movers with a sharp, angry flick of her wrist. They dropped the chair with a heavy thud that shook the floorboards and fled the room as if the house itself were catching fire. Vanessa turned to me, her face contorted into a sneer that stripped away every ounce of her brand consultant polish. You are a sad, lonely, pathetic old man, she spat, stepping into my personal space. The scent of her perfume was overwhelming now, like flowers rotting in a vase. You think this house makes you powerful? You think these walls give you a legacy? It's just a pile of wood and stone, Thomas. It's an asset. And assets are meant to be liquidated. Lucas loves this house, I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. Lucas hates it here, she countered. He told me he feels suffocated by the smell of old paper and your dead wife's ghost. He's counting the days until he can breathe somewhere that doesn't smell like a funeral home. Lair, I whispered. He won't tell you, she smiled, stepping even closer, her eyes dancing with malice. Because he's a good... He'll let you rot here in your fortress while he lives the life I give him. I'm the only one strong enough to cut the cord, Thomas. And believe me, the blade is already halfway through. She leaned in, her breath cold against my ear. Go ahead, hit me. Give me a reason to call the police and have you removed from your own property for instability. I'm waiting. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my study, the leather chair returned to its rightful place, and watched the rain lash against the glass. I was shaking. Yes, but beneath the tremors, my judicial mind was whirring into gear. For decades I had looked at evidence. I had looked at patterns. Now the patterns were screaming. The isolation of the victim. The siphoning of funds. The gaslighting of the guardian. The obsession with the appraisal value of the estate. This wasn't just a difficult daughter-in-law. This was a professional. This was a demolition. I reached into the back of my desk and pulled out a key I hadn't used in years. I unlocked the bottom drawer and took out a weathered, leather-bound address book from my days in the city. I turned to the letter K. Detective Frank Kelly, retired. Frank had been the lead on the most complex racketeering cases I'd ever presided over. He was a man who understood that the most dangerous criminals don't wear masks. They wear tailored suits and bright smiles. I picked up the phone, My hand was steady now. "Frank," I said when the gravelly, smoke-cured voice answered on the third ring. "It's Judge Vance. I'm sorry to call so late." "Tom?" Frank said, and I could hear the immediate shift in his tone, the alertness of a hunter. I haven't heard that voice since we put the Gambino associates away. "What's wrong?" "I need a favor, Frank. A deep one. I need you to run a name through every database you still have a back door to. I need the truth, not the LinkedIn profile." "Shoot." Vanessa Holt. Claims to be from Chicago. Claims to be a high-end brand consultant. She's about to marry my son, and Frank, the structural integrity of her story is failing. "You sound worried, Tom," Frank said. There was the sound of a match striking. Frank never could quit the cigars. "I'm not worried, Frank. I'm terrified. I think there's a shark in the water, and my son is dangling his feet off the boat, thinking he's at a spa." "I'm on it," Frank said. "I'll call in some markers at the bureau. Give me 24 hours. The next morning, the rising tide reached my front door in the form of a white contractor truck. Sam, a local builder who had helped me replace the roof after the 2018 storms, climbed out, looking deeply uncomfortable. He was holding a clipboard and a tape measure. "Morning, Judge," Sam said, avoiding my eyes. He looked at the guest cottage, then back at me. "I'm here for the estimate. The lady said it was urgent." "Estimate for what, Sam?" "The demolition," Sam said softly, "and the clearing of the site." She said the guest cottage. "Your wife's studio is full of black mold and structural rot. Said it was a public health hazard." My knees almost buckled. The guest cottage wasn't just a building. It was Eleanor's studio. Her easels were still there. The smell of linseed oil and turpentine still clung to the rafters. Her unfinished sketches, the ones she was working on before the cancer took her strength, were still tucked into the drawers. "It is not full of mold, Sam," I whispered, my voice cracking. "It is full of my life." "I figured as much, Judge," Sam said, sighing. She seemed very insistent. Told me if I didn't do it, she'd find a crew from the city who would. "I'll tell her I'm booked up for the next 6 months." "But you've got a problem on your hands, Tom." I sent Sam away and found Lucas in the kitchen, staring into a cup of cold coffee. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. "Did you know?" I asked, my voice trembling with suppressed fury. "About the studio? About her plan to tear it down?" Lucas didn't look up. "Vanessa thinks we need a dedicated yoga and wellness space, Dad, for her high-net-worth clients. She says the cottage is depressing, that it keeps us tethered to the past." "That was your mother's heart, Lucas. Every painting she ever made is in that room." "Mom is gone, Dad," Lucas suddenly shouted, slamming his hand on the counter. The violence of it startled both of us. He looked at his hand, then at me, his eyes filling with tears. "She is gone," he said, his voice dropping to a jagged whisper. "And we are still here. Vanessa is just trying to make a life for us. She's trying to build something new. Why can't you just let her?" "By erasing everything that came before?" "That's not building, Lucas. That's a scorched earth policy. It's moving forward," he said, but he sounded like a man reading from a script he didn't believe in. He looked like he was drowning, and he was convinced that the person holding his head underwater was his only source of air. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A private number. I walked into the pantry and closed the door. "Frank, you sitting down, Judge?" "Because this one is a doozy. Tell me." "Domnisa Holt doesn't exist," Frank said, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. "The social security number she's using belongs to a girl who died in a car accident in 1998 in rural Nebraska. She's a ghost, Tom. A ghost with a very expensive haircut." I gripped the edge of a shelf, my knuckles white. "Who is she?" "I ran the prints," Frank continued. "Remember that wine glass you accidentally left on the porch for me to collect? I ran them through the Interstate Compact. They match a woman named Veronica Haynes." "Who is Veronica Haynes?" "A professional, a high-stakes grifter. Bigamy, wire fraud, grand larceny. She's been operating out of Florida and Texas for a decade. She has a type. She targets wealthy, grieving widowers or their vulnerable heirs. She marries into the estate, creates a wedge between the family members, and then the harvest begins."
"The harvest?" I asked, the word feeling like ice in my mouth.
"She clears out the liquid assets, forces a sale of the property, and then vanishes. But here's the kicker, Tom. She's technically still married to her last client. The room seemed to tilt. To whom? A man named Arthur Pendergast in Seattle. A world-renowned architect. Wealthy, successful. Just like your son is projected to be. They were married 18 months ago. Where is Arthur Pendergast now? I asked, my mind already calculating the legal ramifications. He's in a long-term care facility, Frank said. He suffered a massive, unexplained stroke 2 weeks after the wedding. While he was in the ICU, his new bride, our Veronica, emptied his offshore accounts, sold his firm's intellectual property, and disappeared before the lawyers could even file the papers. Is he able to travel? I asked, my voice turning to a cold, judicial iron. He's in a wheelchair. He can't speak much, just a few words. But his daughter and his lead attorney have been looking for Vanessa for a year. They want blood, Tom, and they want justice. Get them here, I said. Get the lawyer. Get Arthur. I don't care if you have to charter a private jet on my dime. Get them to this house by Saturday morning. Before the ceremony. You're playing a dangerous game, Tom, Frank warned. If she realizes you're onto her, she might bolt. Or she might get desperate. These types don't go quietly. Let her get desperate, I said, looking through the pantry slats at Vanessa, who was laughing on her cell phone in the garden. I spent 35 years dealing with desperate people. I know exactly how they break. The day before the wedding, the property was unrecognizable. The rugged, honest beauty of the coast had been smothered under layers of white silk and expensive pretension. Massive tents, white and clinical, covered the lawn like a shroud, obscuring the dunes Eleanor and I had spent decades protecting. The smell of salt and cedar, the very breath of the house, was choked out by the suffocating, cloying scent of 10,000 imported lilies. I played my part. I was the defeated father, the aging pensioner. She wanted me to be. I sat in the corner of the kitchen or the study, my shoulders rounded, nodding vaguely when asked for my opinion, signing checks with a hand that I allowed to tremble just enough. I watched her through half-lidded eyes as she strutted through the rooms, already mentally measuring for new curtains, already erasing the man who had built it all. I walked into my study late that afternoon to find the late autumn sun casting long, skeletal shadows across the floor. Vanessa was there, hunched over my heavy oak filing cabinet. She was using a small professional-grade tension tool on the lock, the kind of skill a brand consultant rarely lists on a resume. Looking for something? I asked, my voice dry and scratchy. She didn't jump. She didn't even flinch. She simply straightened up, smoothing her skirt with a practiced, elegant motion, the tool vanishing into her pocket with a magician's grace. Just looking for a stapler, Thomas, she said, her voice dripping with a casual, terrifying boredom. The seating charts need organizing. The stapler is in the top desk drawer next to the fountain pen, I said, walking toward her. That cabinet, however, holds the deed to this house, along with the title to the guest cottage and the land rights to the cliffside. She looked at the cabinet, then back at me. A small, hungry smile played at the corners of her mouth. Lucas and I were talking this morning. We both feel, and I'm sure you'll agree, that it would be best for everyone if you transferred the title to us before the ceremony tomorrow. For tax purposes, of course, to avoid the inevitable complications of your estate later. I'm sure you've thought about the taxes very carefully. Veronica, I said. She stiffened for a fraction of a second at the name, but her mask held. It's Vanessa, Thomas. Perhaps you should have your hearing checked along with your memory. It's going to happen one way or another, she said, walking past me toward the door. She stopped just as she reached me, leaning in so close I could see the cold, reptilian stillness in her pupils. You're old, Thomas. You're becoming a liability to yourself. You shouldn't be burdened with managing such a large estate. You might forget to pay the insurance. You might leave the stove on. You might fall. She reached up and patted my cheek, a gesture that was supposed to be affectionate but felt like the dry touch of a snake's skin. We just want to make sure you're taken care of, in a facility that can handle your specific needs. That evening, a cry from the upstairs guest room shattered the uneasy peace. I found Lucas standing in the doorway, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated grief. On the floor, scattered across the dark mahogany like drops of frozen milk, were Eleanor's pearls. The necklace had been a wedding gift from her father. Lucas had intended for Vanessa to wear it tomorrow, a bridge between the mother he lost and the wife he was gaining. It must have just fallen, Vanessa said, standing by the vanity, her hands splayed in mock horror. I went to pick it up to try it on, and it just disintegrated. The silk cord was so old, so cheap. It's a shame, really. I knelt down and picked up a single pearl. I didn't need a magnifying glass to see the truth. The nylon string hadn't snapped from age or tension. The ends were clean, angled, and sharp. It had been cut with a pair of embroidery scissors. She wasn't just clearing the house. She was systematically destroying every emotional anchor Lucas had. She was marking her territory by urinating on the memory of the woman who came before her. Lucas picked up the pearls in a heavy, suffocating silence. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not quite realization, but a shadow of doubt. A crack in the foundation. The rehearsal dinner was a lavish, over-the-top affair that felt more like a corporate gala than a family gathering. Vanessa was radiant, moving through the crowd of clients and influencers like a queen among her subjects. I sat at the end of the long table, sipping water, my mind counting down the hours. After the toast's hollow, rehearsed speeches about new beginnings, Vanessa cornered me on the back deck. The guests were inside, the sound of their laughter muffled by the heavy glass. Below us, the Atlantic roared, a black, infinite maw that seemed to be waiting for something to fall. "Did you bring the transfer papers?" she asked. There was no preamble this time, no Thomas, no fake concern. Her voice was as sharp as the wind coming off the water. "No," I said, leaning against the railing. "You're making a catastrophic mistake," she hissed. "I've already spoken to the notary. I have the documents ready in my bag. All you have to do is sign. The only mistake I've made, Vanessa, or whatever your name is today, was letting you cross the threshold of this house." She stepped closer, the wind whipping her blonde hair across her face until she looked like a banshee. "Listen to me, you stubborn old bastard," she whispered, her face inches from mine. "I have worked too hard for this. I have spent 8 months listening to your son's pathetic, boring stories about his childhood and his vision for architecture. I have suffered through your judgmental glares and the smell of this rotting, salt-soaked pile of wood you call a home. I am not leaving here empty-handed. I didn't invest nearly a year of my life for a government pensioner's blessing." "You'll get nothing but a prison cell," I said, my voice steady. She laughed, a jagged manic sound that was swallowed by the surf. "Here is how this is going to go, Thomas. Here is the deal you're going to accept. Tomorrow, at the reception, during the father of the groom speech, you are going to stand up. You are going to tell everyone how much you love us. And then you are going to announce that as a wedding gift you are gifting us the deed to the beach house and the surrounding acreage. You will hand me that folder, signed and notarized, in front of 300 witnesses," she continued. "And if you refuse," she said, her voice dropping to a low, melodic tremor of pure evil, "I'll lie, and I am a very, very good liar. I'll wait until the middle of the toast. I'll start crying. I'll tell everyone that you cornered me here tonight on this very deck. I'll say you grabbed me, that you made suggestions, that you told me if I didn't satisfy you, you'd cut Lucas out of the will." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was the one accusation a man of my standing could never fully wash off. "I'll tear my dress," she whispered, her eyes wide with a terrifying, calculated excitement. "I'll bruise my own arms. I'll make it graphic, Thomas. I'll describe the way you smelled of old gin and desperation. I'll make sure every one of those clients in there sees you as a predator." "Lucas would never believe you," I said, but even I could hear the tremor of fear in my words. "Wouldn't he?" She tilted her head. "He's already primed for it. I've been telling him for months that you're confused, that your boundaries are slipping. He's already worried about your urges and your mental decline. If I stand there trembling and tell him his father touched me, his heart will break, but his mind will accept it. He will hate you for the rest of his life, Thomas. He will be so disgusted he'll never look at you again. You will lose your son, your reputation, and your freedom. So choose the house or your son's love. Which one are you willing to burn?" She stepped back, smoothing her hair, the brand consultant mask sliding back into place as if it had never left. "I'll see you at the altar, Dad." She turned and walked back into the party, slipping her arm through Lucas's and whispering something in his ear that made him smile. A smile of pure tragic ignorance. I stood in the dark for a long time. The wind was freezing, but I didn't feel it. I felt only a cold, judicial clarity. She was brilliant. It was a perfect trap. In a world of he said, she said, the young bride always wins against the mentally declining father. She had weaponized my son's own love and concern against me. But she had forgotten the one thing I had learned in 35 years on the bench. A lie can only survive in a vacuum. It cannot survive the introduction of a larger, more undeniable truth. I took my phone out of my pocket. My thumb hovered over the screen. I looked through the glass at my son, the boy I had raised to be honest, kind, and strong. I saw the way he looked at her with a desperate hope that he had finally found a home. I sent a single text to Frank Kelly. It's a go, bring everything. Bring everyone. The wedding ceremony was a masterpiece of atmospheric dread. It was held on the very edge of the cliff, under a canopy of white silk that whipped and snapped in the gale like the sails of a ghost ship. I sat in the front row, a silent sentinel in a charcoal suit, watching my only son commit his life to a phantom. I watched him say, I do. I watched him slide a ring onto the finger of a woman who had spent the last 8 months calculating the liquidation value of his soul. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stand up, to stop the madness, but I held my peace. In the law, a crime must often be fully consummated for the punishment to be absolute. I needed her to believe she had won. I needed her to sign the marriage certificate, the final piece of evidence in her own undoing. The reception was held in the grand ballroom tent, a climate-controlled bubble of opulence that felt utterly alien to the rugged coast outside. The champagne flowed with a desperate, frantic energy. Vanessa, now legally Mrs. Vance, or so she thought, sat 3 seats away from me at the head table. She was radiant, her face flushed with the victory of the hunt. Every time she looked at me, she raised an eyebrow, a silent, predatory flick of her eyes that said, Time is up, old man. Give me the house, or I'll destroy the son. She was already holding the metaphorical knife to my reputation, waiting for the moment to twist it. The speeches began. The best man told stories. Lucas's childhood that felt like they belonged to a different person. The maid of honor spoke of Vanessa's generosity and vision. Then the MC tapped the microphone, the sound echoing like a heartbeat through the speakers. And now, a few words from the father of the groom, Judge Thomas Vance. I stood up, my legs felt heavy, as if I were wading through deep water, but my mind was a diamond, hard, clear, and sharp. I felt the weight of 35 years of justice behind me. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was the bench. As I walked toward the microphone, Vanessa stood up too. She intercepted me, ostensibly to straighten my tie for the photographers. Her hands were cold as she fumbled with my silk knot. Do it now, Thomas, she whispered, her breath smelling of expensive gin and malice. The speech, the gift of the deed. Or I start screaming the moment you sit down. I'll make sure the last thing Lucas remembers of you is the shame. I looked down at her. I looked at the greed, the arrogance, and the hollow vacuum where a soul should have been. And then I did something she didn't expect. I laughed. It started as a low chuckle, and grew into a full, resonant laugh that filled the tent, cutting through the polite clinking of silverware. The guests went silent. Lucas looked at me, his brow furrowed in confusion and alarm. "Oh, darling," I said, my voice projected with the authority that had once commanded entire courthouses. I leaned into the microphone, my words booming across the room. "Before we get to the gifts, why don't you introduce our distinguished guests? I believe they've traveled a very long way to see you." Vanessa froze. Her hand dropped from my tie. "What are you talking about?" I pointed a steady finger toward the back of the tent. "Frank, open the flaps." The heavy white canvas was pulled back, letting in a violent swirl of salt spray and freezing wind. Frank Kelly stepped through the opening, looking every bit the veteran detective in his dress blues. But it was the person beside him that stopped the hearts of everyone in the room. A woman, in a sharp gray suit, pushed a motorized wheelchair into the light of the chandeliers. The man in the chair was thin, his frame swallowed by a tailored wool coat. One side of his face sagged from the aftermath of a stroke. But his eyes, those eyes were wide, burning with a terrible silent recognition. Vanessa turned. The color drained from her face so rapidly it was as if a plug had been pulled. She looked like a marble statue of terror. "Hello, Veronica," the woman pushing the wheelchair said. Her voice was calm, professional, and utterly lethal. "Or is it Vanessa today? My name is Diane Pendergast. I'm the daughter of the man whose life you tried to steal in Seattle." Lucas stood up, his chair clattering to the floor. "Dad, who is that? What is happening?" "That," I said, my voice as hard as the granite cliffs outside, "is Mr. Arthur Pendergast, an architect, a husband, and the man this woman is still legally married to." The tent erupted into a cacophony of gasps and whispers. Arthur Pendergast raised a shaking, trembling hand. He couldn't speak, but he pointed a single, accusatory finger directly at the woman in the white wedding dress. "He is the man," I continued, "whose accounts you drained while he lay in a coma you likely induced. He is the man you left for dead so you could come here and find a new asset to liquidate." "Liar!" Vanessa shrieked. It wasn't the purr of a consultant anymore, it was the howl of a trapped animal. She turned to the guests, her eyes wild. "He's lying. My father-in-law is senile. He hired these actors to ruin my day. She is still legally married to him," the lawyer announced, stepping forward and holding up a certified copy of the Washington state marriage license. The divorce was never filed because the bride vanished with the funds. "This marriage to Lucas Vance is not only a fraud, it is a felony. It is bigamy." Lucas looked at the document. He looked at the man in the wheelchair. Then he looked at the woman he had just sworn to love forever. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back, his face contorting in a mask of pure shattered betrayal. "Lucas!" Vanessa screamed, lunging for him, grabbing his arm with manic strength. "Don't listen. I love you. I did it for us. I needed the money to start our life. He was old. He didn't need it." Lucas looked down at her hand on his sleeve, the same hand that had likely cut his mother's pearls. He looked at her as if she were a stranger he had found in the dark. "Don't touch me," he whispered. It was the quietest thing he had said all day, but it carried more weight than my own shouting. He pulled his arm away with such force. She nearly fell. "Don't ever touch me again." Vanessa saw the wall closing in. She saw the two uniformed officers stepping into the tent behind Frank. She saw the clients and networks she had worked so hard to impress, pulling away from her as if she were contagious. The coastal ethereal vibe was gone. The brand was dead. All that was left was Veronica Haynes, the grifter. Her eyes went wide and glassy. In a blur of white silk, she reached for the head table and grabbed a heavy silver steak knife. "I won't go back," she screamed, brandishing the blade at me. "You ruined it, you selfish ancient bastard. You should have just died in your chair." She lunged at me, the knife aimed for my chest with a desperate, clumsy violence. But I didn't flinch. I didn't have to. Lucas moved faster than I thought possible. He stepped between us, his body a shield, catching her wrist in midair. The strength he had inherited from me, the strength he had forgotten he had, came surging back. "Drop it," Lucas said. His voice was shaking with rage and grief. But it was the voice of a man who had finally found his footing. "Lucas, please," she sobbed, her legs giving out. "Drop it, Veronica," he said, using the name of the stranger she truly was. The knife clattered onto the dance floor, spinning until it came to rest against a discarded wedding favor. The police swarmed her, pinning her arms behind her back. As the handcuffs clicked shut, a sound I had heard 1,000 times in my courtroom, the last of her composure vanished. She began to scream. Foul, guttural curses rained down on me, on Lucas, and on the house itself. "I hate you. I hope you rot in this salt pit. It's just wood. It's just wood and ghosts." They dragged her out through the mud, her white dress trailing behind her like a tattered shroud. The tent emptied with a haunting speed. The guests fled the scandal, leaving behind half-eaten cake and thousands of dollars of wilting lilies. Within an hour, it was just the two of us, the wind and the ocean. I found Lucas an hour later. He wasn't in the house. He was sitting on the old, salt-stained oak bench, under the tree she had wanted to kill. He was staring out at the Atlantic, his tuxedo jacket gone, his white shirt soaked by the rain. I sat down beside him. I didn't say anything at first. I just let the sound of the waves fill the space between us. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the surf. Dad, I'm so sorry. I was so blind. I let her turn me against you. I let her turn me against Mom. You weren't blind, Lucas, I said gently, putting my arm around his trembling shoulders. You were hopeful. There is no shame in wanting to believe in love. The shame belongs to those who use that hope as a weapon. I almost gave her the house, he said, a sob finally breaking through. I almost gave away the only thing we have left of her. But you didn't, I said. I looked up at the oak tree. Its branches were bare, whipped by the wind. But its roots were deep, locked into the very marrow of the cliff. The house is still here. The tree is still here. And I am still here. He looked at the rough bark of the tree, reaching out to touch a knot in the wood. She said it ruined the view. She said it was an obstacle. She didn't understand, I said. The tree isn't blocking the view, Lucas. The tree is the view. It's the proof that you can survive the storm, if your foundation is deep enough. We sat there, in the fading gray light, until the rain turned to a soft mist. The nor'easter was moving out to sea, leaving behind a cold, clean silence. What do we do now? Lucas asked, looking at the dark house, where the golden lights were still burning in the windows. Now, I said, standing up and offering him my hand. We go inside. We build a fire. We call Martha and tell her she's coming back on Monday with a substantial raise. And then we start taking down the decorations. Lucas smiled, a weak, watery but genuine smile. He took my hand and pulled himself up. We walked back toward the fortress of cedar and glass together. The structure had held. The pile of wood had survived another assault. As we stepped through the heavy front door, I looked back one last time at the ocean. It was still there, dark and hungry, but for tonight the lighthouse was still standing, and the silence was finally our own again. The judge's verdict is final, and the house remains standing. But in a world full of predators like Veronica, could Lucas have ever seen it coming on his own? Or was the judge's intervention the only way to save the legacy? Let us know what you think of this father's ultimate defense in the comments below.